Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and I hope you're having an amazing day. This is going to be a really fun video. Of course, this is one of my fun lists, and for this one, we're going to be doing a lot of character builds from the DLC, starting out with Freyja. We have a build for Leda later. We have a build for Thiollier, if that's how you say his name. I believe I'm pronouncing it correctly there. I'll go over that again later. It's a little bit difficult to pronounce. And a lot of good stuff here. A lot of fun favorite builds that I have towards the end, and a lot of character builds. This is a really good one. Definitely want to stick around, tune into, and make powerful builds out of some of the characters from the DLC. So for Freyja, we're using her armor set along with Freyja's greatsword. We're using regular Lion's Claw as well because it's pretty powerful. Savage Lion's Claw is good. I still think regular Lion's Claw is better though. I'm using the brass shield. I actually got cut out from the end of the quest of getting the lion shield that she has. However, the brass shield looks good too, and it actually has better guard boost, so I'd actually recommend that over the other shield if you want to block. Turn it into a little bit of a guard counter build, mixing in Lion's Claw. Some interesting things about Freyja is she's a follower of Miquella. You find her throughout the DLC, you'll talk to her several times. She's one of the red mains, so she gets a boost to red main's Ash of Wars with Freyja's greatsword. Keep that in mind, if you're ever not using Freyja's greatsword, you can actually offhand it, use a regular hand weapon like Guts greatsword for example, and get the boost to red main Ashes of War. And in a second here, we're going to go over equipment stats, everything you need to know for a powerful Freyja build from the DLC, and then we're going to move on to more character builds and some of my favorite fun builds in Elden Ring to try out in 2025. We're going to go over equipment stats, everything you need to know, and this is a really good build, definitely one worth checking out that mixes guard counters, Lion's Claw, and a little bit of blocking and shield use. Let's jump into equipment. And we have Freyja's heavy greatsword with Lion's Claw. We have the brass shield. Any seal for buffs. We have her armor set on here. It doesn't give you 51 poise though, unfortunately. Pearl Shield Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Great Shield Talisman, Curved Sword Talisman, Opaline Hard Tier, Green Burst Crystal Tier. Let's jump into stats. And our stats are 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 40 Endurance. We got a lot of Endurance for this build. 50 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 25 Faith. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grip Me Strength, and Blessings Boon as our buffs. Next up is a long requested build for Thiollier. This is a really cool one because you get to mix in poison and sleep. That's his thing, right? He wants basically eternal sleep. It's a whole quest line with Saint Trina. And his Ash of War on his weapon is actually pretty cool. It's basically an impaling thrust version that gives you a little bit of eternal sleep buildup and poise damage. And then, of course, being able to use the deadly perfume bottle for poison. The mix is really good, and you can get the buffs from Kindred of Rot's Exaltation and the Sleep Talisman as well. Let's jump into equipment, stats, everything you need to know. And we have Thiolier's Hidden Needle, plus 10 preferably, the Deadly Perfume Bottle. We have the Dragon Communion Seal. Of course, we're using his armor set here, only 30 poise. Saint Trina's Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, Kindred of Rot's Exaltation. Then we have the Outer God Heirloom to give us some arcane, so we can use the Deadly Perfume Bottle. Thorny Tier, Bloodsucking Crack Tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 18 Mind, 25 Endurance, 12 Strength, 50 Dexterity, 35 Intelligence, 25 Faith, 19 Arcane. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blessings Boon as our buffs. And next up, we have a build for Ansbach. This is a really cool one because we get to use Furious Blade of Ansbach, which is just okay. It's an incantation that's fun to use, but mainly Dynastic Sickle Play, which is the Ash of War on his scythe, is really cool. It does a lot of poise damage, doesn't do a ton of bleed buildup. With 45 Arcane, it gets around 72, 73 bleed, something like that. But the amount of poise damage you can get with this is really cool, and this is a character that even helps you fight Radahn. Let's jump into equipment. We have Obsidian Lumina, plus 10 preferably, Dragon Communion Seal. We're using his whole armor set here. Wingsword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander. We have Lord of Blood's Exaltation, and then we have a Thorny Tier, Bloodsucking Crack Tier. We're using Market Shackle there to stun the mini-boss. Let's jump into stats here. We have 60 Vigor, 18 Mind, 25 Endurance, 12 Strength, 40 Dexterity, 45 Arcane, 25 Faith, Golden Vow, Flame Grip Strength, Blessing Spoon, and Furious Blade of Ansbach. Now, another way to build around his awesome build, which is really fun to use, by the way, is instead of using successive attack talismans, if you're just using the Ash and going for poise breaks, you could add the Blade of Mercy and Dagger Talisman to replace Winged Sword or Rotten Winged Sword Insignia and Millicent's Prosthesis, although the extra 5 dexterity from Millicent's Prosthesis is hugely helpful. And then for your tier, you can go with the Bloodsucking Crack tier and the Stamina tier instead. You're going to get a lot of poise breaks even at higher journeys. This is on Journey 3, but this weapon's Ash, it just does really good poise damage. It's definitely worth a look. Doesn't get a ton of bleed build up, but all around, he has a really fun build. And next up here, we have a build for, I believe I'm saying this right, it's going to be the Blackgaol Knight. I believe it's pronounced much like the Everjails. And this is a really cool one too, because we get to use the Sword of Solitude with his full set. And I built around a little bit of defense here too, so we could take a lot of hits, because this is a boss at the beginning of DLC that has beat up so many players, myself included. He's really difficult if you go in and fight him right away. So I figured I'd kind of design him that way so that we could take some hits and do a good amount of damage and build around strength and endurance. This is going to be a fun one for strength users. I recommend trying this out if you are a strength user, because you're going to get a good amount of damage out of his weapon while being able to take a significant amount of hits as well. Let's jump into equipment, stats, everything you need to know for a Blackgaol Knight build. We have the Great Sword of Solitude, plus 10 preferably. We have any seal for buffs. We have the Armor of Solitude set on. Great Jar's Arsenal, Shard of Alexander, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, and then we have the Faith tier, Opaline Hard tier, and we're using Market Shackle there to stun the boss. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 43 Endurance, 54 Strength. That's going to be over 80 if you two-hand the weapon, 13 Dexterity, 30 Faith. Our buffs are Golden Vow, Black Flame's Protection, and Blessing's Boon. And next up, we have a build for Moore. This has to be one of the most fun ones on this list. Now, technically speaking, he doesn't really use a weapon. He just uses the shield. But since I don't want my video to go on forever, I decided to add a little bit with the weapon here. We have a Bastard Sword with guard counter ability, of course, when we're using our shield and blocking. And then it has Savage Lion's Claw on it, which I'll show off in a little bit in terms of the Ash of War. The main idea here, though, is going to be to block. You're going to have a heavy equipment load because guess what? Moore has a heavy equipment load in the game too. So if you're going to build around him, then of course we're going to have the heavy equipment load. A lot of armor here. We've got 100 poise, and we've got a shield that can block really well too. It's probably a really good build for co-op, and his Ash of War and a shield is really cool too. You can actually charge towards enemies, which is awesome, and when you do that, for the most part, you're going to be blocking the entire time, and it's not going to use much stamina up either. This is one of those shields in the game where you can kind of block most things. I do get hit because I get greedy a bit, but if I had focused on blocking and watched my stamina bar, even just some, you can block the majority of attacks. You can see the amount of stamina damage he's doing here. It takes a lot of hits for him to end up breaking me. And Moore's a cool character that you can end up fighting towards the end of the DLC, and he's also a merchant, but overall he's got one of the coolest armor sets in the DLC that offers 100 poise and a really good shield. Let's jump into equipment and stats. We have the Bastard Sword and Heavy Affinity with Savage Lion's Claw. We have his shield. We have his Verdigris armor set, if that's how you say it. Any silver buffs. Arsenal Charm +1, our Great Jar's Arsenal, Shard of Alexander, Great Shield Talisman, Curved Sword Talisman, Opaline Heart tier, and Green Burst Crystal tier. Let's jump into stats. We have 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 40 Endurance, 50 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 25 Faith. Our buffs are Golden Vow, Flame Grip Strength, Blessing Spoon. By the way, I have the same stats as the Freyja build, so you could use both of those if you want to try out either one. And there's the awesome Shield Bash, and of course Savage Lion's Call to add on to give us at least a little bit of damage with his build to be able to block, and then of course use guard counters and a really good Ash of War. And next up, we have a build for Leda, and this is a really cool one because I love this Ash of War. The only downside about her weapon is the Ash of War just doesn't do enough damage. It's incredibly convenient, though, because it has really good tracking, does a little bit of, I believe it's holy damage, a little bit of holy damage on the weapon and physical damage. You get the light greatsword moveset. Still think her weapon needs a buff. It's just not quite there damage-wise. It has a little bit of a split with holy damage, but as far as a light greatsword, of course, Milady's going to be a lot better. Leda herself, really interesting character. She ends up being a follower of Mikola, and towards the end of DLC, you will end up being in a boss fight with her. It's not the best boss fight in the world, but ultimately her questline is interesting. A lot of the DLC questlines I ended up liking. It's got some cool characters too. Let's jump into equipment. Sigurd was still peak, but anyway, we have Leda's Greatsword plus 10 preferably. We have the Erdtree seal. We have part of the Oathkeeper set, her chest piece on, and I'll explain the rest of the armor set in a second. Ritual Sword Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Millicent's Prosthesis, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Holy Tear, Thorny Tear. Let's jump into stats. So I decided to go for the Black Knight Greaves and the Gauntlets as well to give her 51 poise because she was so close and it looks similar, but generally she wears the Oathkeeper set. 60 Vigor, 21 Mind, 28 Endurance, 55 Dexterity, 40 Faith. Our buffs are Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blessings Boon. Her weapon, by the way, I wanted to show this, is amazing for regular mobs. If you're going through like single mobs and stuff and you're just trying to run through the game, it has really good tracking. It can be incredibly convenient. So if you're ever struggling going through the game, Leda's Greatsword is absolutely amazing for that. Yeah, I think I mentioned that over the summer, the only other time I really covered her Greatsword, but it's great for mobs. Next up, we have a build with the Ripple Blade. This is a simple build that uses greases. Now, I believe the Eternal Sleep Grease scales with Arcane as far as I know, and of course Poison Grease and Bleed Grease does as well. Great with the Ripple Blade, which gives you an S in Arcane, and a really fun build to use if you want to build around greases. Something I've been trying out lately that can work well for a lot of bosses, and it's fun to use. Let's jump into equipment, stats, everything you need to know for this build. Also, using greases with Bloodhound's Fang's a lot of fun as well, but the Ripple Blade's an interesting weapon. We have it at plus 25, it has Wild Strikes on it, any seal for buffs, part of the Rakshasa set, Solitude chest piece on, Satrina's Smile, of course. We have Shard of Alexander, Millicent's Prosthesis, Wingsword Insignia, or Rotten Wingsword Insignia if you have it, Bloodsucking Crack Tear, Thorny Tear, Eternal Sleep Grease, Freezing Grease, Poison Grease, and Blood Grease would be good too. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 28 Endurance, 12 Strength, 20 Dexterity, 25 Faith, 60 Arcane. Our buffs are Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and we're also using Blessings Boon. Next up, I've been trying to perfect a Roar build for DLC. Roars are really difficult to use in the DLC. I got hit there. They're really hard to use because they're relatively slow, and as you can see they're difficult to get off in terms of actually using the charged hits. However, I do love roars in the sense that you get more status effect build up with the hits, you get a lot of damage, you get a lot of poise damage, so I tried to come up with a weapon and build that can make better use of roars in the DLC. And for this, we ended up using the Sweehander, if that's how I'm saying it right. I hope I'm saying it right. I keep saying it wrong all the time. It's a difficult word to say again. It's not an American word. We got a posture break in there. But I like this weapon because the jumping and regular hits tend to be a little faster than using something like Guts. It does pierce damage, and I have a decent amount of luck with getting in the charged attacks as well. It's not perfect. Roars are still incredibly difficult to use in the DLC, but you can make good use of a build like this one. Get in some poise breaks, and in this case, we're using it in Cold Affinity to get Frost build up too. Yeah, and Commander Gaius is a really good example to use this on because he's one of those bosses that's kind of anti-attack and anti-heal. Anytime you go to attack or heal, he tends to go into something that's obnoxious. I'm not a fan of this boss fight whatsoever. This is my least favorite fight in the DLC, but it only took a couple of tries with this build and setup. I got a good amount of Frost build up, good amount of physical damage, and some poise breaks as well. This is one to try if you're into Roar builds, but with that said, keep in mind, especially for the DLC bosses, you may struggle trying to carry a Roar build through the DLC. Some of the bosses are really quick, and they have very long combos too, which makes it even more difficult. Something to take note of for sure if you're one of those players that is using a Roar build and you find yourself having a hard time in the DLC. It's pretty common because the builds are a little bit slow. We have the Cold Sweehander plus 25 at Braggart's Roar. We have the Highland Axe for the passive, any seal for buffs. We have the Gravebird set and Rakshasa set on Axe Talisman, Two-Handed Sword Talisman, Roar Medallion. We have Great Jar's Arsenal, and then we have the Faith tier and Spike Crack tier. Let's jump into stats. And for the stats on this one, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 27 Endurance, 34 Strength, that's over 50 when you two-hand this, 45 Dexterity, 35 Faith. We're using Golden Vow, Black Flame's Protection, and Blessings Boon. Next up, we have one of my favorite builds of all time, and that's a Lightning Faith hybrid. In this case, we're going to end up using Milady. We're going to use it in Keen Affinity with Stormblade, and then we have Electrify Armament on it, and we're also using Knight's Lightning Spear. This is one that combines a lot of different things, focusing on lightning and, of course, Stormblade too. It's a really good build overall because Stormblade's really convenient, doesn't cost a lot of FP, and you can use it a lot for good damage. And then your regular hits will be decent as well, with an awesome moveset that Milady has. Yeah, I really like the moveset because the Light Greatsword moveset is probably like the coolest looking moveset in the entire game. They should have added more in terms of the Light Greatsword. I've mentioned that several times before. I feel like it was a class they could have added more. Leda's Greatsword should have been better as well, especially the Ash of War, since the Ash of War could be really cool. But back to Milady and using this, there's Knight's Lightning Spear. You get a decent amount of damage with your incantations because you have a good amount of faith, and then a good amount of damage with your regular weapon hits, charge attacks, and then switching back and maining Stormblade because it's a really good Ash of War. This is going to be one that's going to help you, especially if you're struggling in the DLC. Stormblade's pretty much always good. By the way, we have this in Keen Affinity rather than Heavy. The two-handed bonus is nice, but Stormblade scales with Dexterity, so that's going to be a better fit for our specific build. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, everything you need to know. We have Keen Milady plus 25 with Stormblade. We're using Electrify Armament. We have the Gravelstone Seal. We have part of the Rakshasa set and Solitude chest piece on. Shard of Alexander, Enraged Divine Beast Talisman, Millicent's Prosthesis, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Lightning Tier, Bloodsucking Correct Tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 29 Endurance, 12 Strength, 45 Dexterity, 50 Faith, we're using Golden Vow, Black Flame's Protection, Blessings of the Erdtree, Electrify Armament, and Knight's Lightning Spear. So, something that I'm trying to perfect constantly is a Paladin build. I still can't come up what I like most for Paladin builds aside from Sacred Blade, and I think I finally found my weapon. After using the Barbed Staff Spear for a really long time, I really enjoy this weapon. The Ash of War is really cool. You basically get a machine gun holy version, and then when you mix in incantations, holy incantations, you could fit the build completely around holy damage and come up with something that could be really good for DLC as well. Also, a couple notes during this clip. I'm still doing build requests, so if there's something you want to see that I haven't covered, be sure to comment below. I'll probably end up getting to it. It's been really fun doing them. I did a few more in this video. I've been trying to include them. I know you guys like those. And if you're not subbed yet and you love Elden Ring, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Also, lastly, I wanted to mention as well, if you're playing Dark Souls 2, 3, Bloodborne, etc., or any Souls-like games or anything you're looking forward to in terms of releases, be sure to comment below. I'm curious as to what you're playing, what you're enjoying. I know Elden Ring's been great, and we all love Souls games, and for me, it's the best Souls game. I think it's #1 for me. Behind that is Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. But I'd like to start covering some other stuff as well. I've said this in the past before. I've done a couple early game guides for other Souls games, but I'd like to do content in general for other Souls games if that's something you guys are into, or at least kind of mixing in that content with Elden Ring. And I'm looking forward to Night Rain too. I think that's going to be amazing. Hopefully we can get a whole bunch of people on co-op too. That would be really fun. Let's jump into equipment. Barbed Staff Spear plus 10, the Erdtree Seal. We have random armor set on, kind of gives you a Paladin look. Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, Flox Canvas Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, and then we have the Holy Tier, Bloodsucking Crack Tier. Let's jump into stats. And we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 26 Endurance, 14 Strength, 18 Dexterity, 72 Faith. Our buffs are Golden Vow, Black Flame's Protection, Blessings of the Erdtree, Black Blade Incantation, and Multi-Layered Ring of Light. And next up, we have a build for a Godslayer. Somebody was asking for a Black Flame build, and to look at the Godslayer's Greatsword again. Now, the Hyper Armor has been fixed. It's better than it was. It's still a little bit difficult to use. You can use Endure if you're quick enough with it to get off the Ash of War, although the Ash of War is relatively long. What I like about this weapon most, though, and I changed my playstyle with it, is getting in jump attacks, charge attacks. It does good poise damage. And then when I get a boss posture broken, then using the Ash of War, which is going to do around 10,000 damage to a lot of the bosses in the game. Yeah, that's going to be a better playstyle. I think that's going to fit more people in terms of how to use it. Because going up to the boss and trying to get off that whole Ash of War, especially some of the DLC bosses, it's going to be really difficult to do that. The Ash of War is probably one of the longest ashes in the entire game. And of course, you could take damage during it. I'm not sure. It might be a little bit of reduced damage, but overall, you can absolutely be destroyed trying to get off this Ash of War. So for me, I'm going to go for those poise breaks. Then right here, use the Ash of War. Let's see how much damage we get. And then we get around 10,000 damage or so. This boss is neutral to fire, 0 resistance. But most bosses, it's going to be between 6 and 8,000. That's still pretty good. That's a very powerful Ash of War. Keep in mind, this is a very good weapon. I don't like at 150, though, that it has dexterity, faith, and a little bit of strength scaling. That's a lot of stats to go over. And mixing in Black Flame incantations can be good, but we're not going to have incredibly high faith. I think it's going to be around 50 or so. It's not bad. You get the 10% boost from the Godslayer seal. Ultimately, though, if you're looking for a Black Flame build, this could be one for you. Godslayer's Greatsword plus 10 preferably. Dagger with Endure on it. We have the Godslayer seal and the Black Flame set on, mixed with the Black Knight set. Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, Fire Scorpion Charm, Phlox Canvas Talisman, and then we have the Faith tier and Flame tier. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor, 22 Mind, 29 Endurance, 20 Strength, 40 Dexterity. We have 40 Faith. If you use the Faith tier, it'll be 50. Golden Vow, Black Flame's Protection, Blessings of the Erdtree, Black Flame, and Scouring Black Flame. And last on this list is a Sword of Night and Flame caster build. I get beat up by this boss a little bit because I haven't fought the Dragonkin Soldier of Noxtella in like forever. Kind of forgot the moveset and also forgot that going under this boss is not a safe point. But yeah, so a lot of people tell me I don't do enough intelligence builds, so I wanted to do a simple one here that uses the Sword of Night and Flame, and then stuff like glintstone spells, kind of give you variety to use whatever you want to use in terms of your spells because we have 70 intelligence, and then of course being able to use the beam of the Sword of Night and Flame as well for a lot of damage. By the way, if you want to see me do a top 10 like intelligence and strength intelligence builds or something like that, I could do that eventually. I know a lot of people are looking for intelligence builds. Supposedly there's like a lack of them right now in terms of looking for builds. I think a lot of that reason though is because Faith looks so much cooler and some of the weapons are really cool. And then for magic, you just have a lot of different blue magic damage stuff. Sure, it's all great, it's all powerful. Comet Azure, Night Comet, etc. are amazing, but it all looks relatively similar, and I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people just have kind of stopped making builds for them. And if you want to make a really fun build, it ends up usually not being magic, but we have the Sword of Night and Flame plus 10 here, Lucette Staff, Jellyfish Shield, any seal for buffs. Check out the armor set here. We have the Circlet of Light on, Rakshasa set, Shard of Alexander, Godfrey Icon, Magic Scorpion Charm. We have Rolana's cameo for the Sword of Night and Flame, Magic tier, Faith tier. Let's jump into stats. I'm not hating on magic, by the way. I have a lot of fun with it from time to time. It just looks similar. We have 50 Vigor, 20 Mind, 22 Endurance, 20 Strength, 15 Dexterity, 71 Intelligence, 34 Faith. We're using Golden Vow, Halasterberry, Blessings Boon, Glintstone Pebble, Glintstone Stars, and Terra Magica. And thanks for watching this one. Thanks for tuning into my top 12 builds to try out, well, fun builds in 2025. These should be really cool. There was a lot of character builds in here and stuff. If you want to see more of those, be sure to comment that as well. If you have build requests, also comment those. And be sure to sub if you're into Elden Ring. If you're looking forward to Elden Ring Night Raid, I'm going to be covering that like crazy when it releases as well. And be sure to join the Discord too, because I'm sure we're going to be doing a whole bunch of different co-op things for Elden Ring Night Raid. Looking forward to that. Catch you in the next video.